Hey everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again. Now it's time for episode 189 of Album of the Day, in which for today's album review, I'm going to be reviewing the latest album from, I think she's a Wisconsin-based singer-songwriter and producer who has been a pretty big part of this new sort of indie movement of gothic pop. And industrial music, which also contains other artists such as Chelsea Wolfe. And I'm talking about the singer-songwriter known as Nika Rosa Danilova, aka Zola Jesus. And I'm here to review who's been a Sacred Bones signee artist for a good chunk of her career. And now I'm here to review her latest album for Sacred Bones, and her first in over 3 years. That was just released on September 8th, 2017. And the album is called Okovi. And as you can see, this is my CD copy here of the album. Which I definitely consider this my goth album of the year. And I'll tell you why it is so later in this review. In which here's the album cover, which this is a really cool album cover, definitely one of my favorites of the year. It's like they took a photo of her face, and then they put on there like this kind of goopy black substance on there, and it looks really cool with its special effects, and it does actually fit pretty well with sort of the tone of the album, and I'll tell you why in a moment. And anyway, here's the back here, and really cool logo for her that she's got here. And anyway, this is the CD. There's over 11 tracks on the album, and it clocks in at over 40 minutes. And basically, it's nothing but white that's underneath it. And then these are the lyrics, which definitely are kind of distorted here in the booklet, but definitely a really cool effect going on here, which I think they were like handwritten by her or something like that, and it's like the same sort of like grungy font that is used in the logo for this artist. And there's the track listing and the liner notes and some of the musicians. Like everything you need to know. Yeah, and this is really cool. This is like Zola Jesus's current logo, but it's like warped and smudged in all kinds of different ways, which definitely some pretty simple, straightforward graphics going on in here, but definitely pretty cool. Anyway, that's the CD packaging for the new Zola Jesus album, Okovi. Like, this record definitely, what I do really like about this record is how, while its lyrics do address some pretty dark, heavy sort of topics, including depression, as well as suicide and and stuff like that. In fact, I heard like in an interview with Face Culture that sort of part of the stuff that had a pretty big impact on this album was her dealings with depression, as well as she once actually had a friend who dealt with it, who almost considered suicide. So definitely some very heavy stuff, but at the same time, there's definitely a sense of optimism, and this album actually evokes not only a sense of like discomfort, but also definitely like calm as well, with its sort of underlying optimism. And also, I think the atmospheric, dark, gothic production definitely does sound really nice on here, as well as her very powerful voice, which I think carries these lyrics home. And she does all kinds of really cool things with her voice throughout this album. Like, it's sort of unpredictable what she can do vocally. I mean, take a look at the opening track, Doma, which basically contains nothing but her voice tracked over 6 or 8 times with some weird little electronic edit effects going on her voice, which make it sound really cool and atmospheric, and it has kind of a surreal quality to it. Like, it feels as if these like female vampires are like coming together and like singing in front of me, but like in a good way. And its lyrics are definitely a pretty simple sentiment, but considering how cool and surreal the vocals sound, it definitely really does make these simple lines sound so beautiful as she sings stuff like at the end, "Take Me Home." And it's a pretty short track, so it's not really a track, it's a song, really more a taster for what to expect on the album. But then all of a sudden, once we get to the first single on the record, Exhumed, we get these really intense, relentless, eerie strings. They're like, like it sounds kind of like something out of a horror movie soundtrack or something like that. It sort of reminds me a little bit of what Radiohead was doing with the string arrangements on the track Burn the Witch. The Witch. So it's got kind of a so it's definitely got kind of a kind of eerie tone to it. That has like, definitely a good sense of like scariness and kind of intensity, but at the same time, I like how they do kind of calm down a little bit once we get midway through the song and end up sounding really beautiful over all the kind of crazy stuff going on production-wise with the kind of tense drum machine and all the odd like electronic noises and stuff like that. And her voice really does fit really well over the kind of aggression with the instrumental, which definitely does take a little inspiration from like industrial music, a little bit. So a little bit, and it's pretty intense lyrics about death. Definitely do fit over the instrumental really well, and there's some really beautiful backup vocals that she does in the track to "Don't Let It Hold You Down." It's kind of like a ghost-like falsetto in the background that I do really like. And then following that is probably my favorite track on the record, "Soak," which not only is the production on the song pretty banging with its really cool syncopated synth and drum loop that kind of creates the rhythm for the song along with its kind of jangly, cathartic piano, which somewhat does remind me a little bit of like the latest Perfume Genius record, a little bit. Latest Perfume Genius record, a little bit, except with kind of a darker tone to it. And this song definitely has some of the best lyrics on the entire LP. Like, I'm like almost hanging on to every single word that she says here on the song, because it's just so memorable. And I think it may be her vocals that are like really doing that for me. Which at points they're kind of like quiet and monotone, but at other points they're kind of like explosive, like at the end of that unsettling bridge on the final line. Is definitely one of the most memorable moments here on this track. So it makes sense she released it as the second single from the record, because we did sort of see how the first single may be sort of making us hungry for something a little more aggressive, but this track, it sort of helps us realize that we're actually going to get probably a more optimistic record than you might expect from the first single. And then following this, we get Ash to Bone, which is sort of another pretty short interlude with some pretty simple lines, but at the same time, it does do a good job of sort of creating a steady album flow and sort of stirring this whole record together with its kind of anxious bowed bass. Just bowed bass and really cool vocal effects, including there's kind of this high soprano howl that goes on over her lead vocal in the background, which does sound really nice on there. Here. And then we get the song Witness, which is pretty much one of the least electronic-oriented tracks on the record. Pretty much all you're hearing instrumentation-wise on this track are strings and vocals, but it just sounds so downright beautiful. And I love how the strings sort of channel the different emotions that she's sort of going through in the song. Like, we get some kind of melancholy strings in the verses, but then the strings have a more hopeful, cathartic tone once you get to that chorus. As this seems like a song that's like being targeted at a friend in her life who's like dealing with depression, who's like thinking about suicide, but like the narrator of this track is sort of telling this person to become a witness to the deep wounds that he's feeling, and to resist that, and to sort of keep that knife away from him, which definitely is a nice bit of hope after some lyrics about how this person feels like he's hanging by a thread and he's sort of begging to be pulled from the wreckage of his mind. And then after this, we get probably my second favorite on the record, and the third single from the album, Siphon, which definitely is some of the best production on the album. And the song is actually co-produced with James Kelly along with Alex DeGroot, who's been like a constant member in her backing band that provides all the weird electronic stuff that you're hearing on the record, like the drum machines and the synthesizers and stuff like that. And this is one track where I really do feel like his production really shines through with the kind of warped electronic loops that happen in the verses, which eventually changes into this really awesome, like, syncopated synth and drum machine coda in the chorus, which punctuates beautifully with her voice as she says, "We'd rather clean the blood of a living man. We'd love to lean over, hold your warm hand. It's 'cause we'd rather clean the blood of a living man. We'd hate to see you give until it's cold, dark nights inside your mind." It's such a great hook, and it definitely has such a great message to it. That I do really like. Definitely one of her strongest moments here on this album. And I love her little chant at the end of, "Won't let you bleed out, can't let you bleed out." And then we have the song Vaka, which is definitely, which is definitely one of the weirder cuts here on the album. It does have kind of this extended 2-minute intro that somehow does feature some really cool elements. We have her voice, including like some sort of backwards looping reversals of her vocals at the beginning over some kind of odd collage like electronic sounds, as well as some percussion that sounds like that sort of sounds like a drumstick on like some metal cans or on like metal barrels or something like that. It definitely does sound really cool. Even if it is definitely one of the stranger moments on the album. But then, after a minute and a half, we eventually get this melancholy, dreary piano, accompanied by some really cool gothic vocals. And this is another song that, while it is kind of less accessible and in your face as Siphon, it does feature yet again a very memorable hook when she sings, "Who will find you when all you are is dust." I know I can't sing that high, but just, I'm saying that this is another moment on the album that just sounds downright incredible here. Incredible here. And then we get the track Wiseblood, which is another true standout here on the record, as this is another song that is incredibly catchy. So I like how, while this album is pretty dark and bizarre and it's not necessarily for everyone, it still has a good sense of accessibility and bluntness about it that I do really like. So I would say this album sort of, sounds a little bit like that latest Anoni album a little bit, Hopelessness. Only difference is it's not as political, more personal, I'd say. And Wiseblood is definitely one of the best tracks. Production-wise, it does sound really cool. I love I really love the sort of industrial percussion stylings that they incorporate into the song, towards the end. That are kind of sequenced to make them sound like drum machines a little bit, and of course some really beautiful synth embellishments going on here too. As well, and this is a song that is sort of, taking a kind of confused sort of look at depression, in the hook of sort of talking about how what doesn't make you wiser doesn't make you stronger, doesn't make you live a little bit, and sort of wondering to the listener, what are you doing? Doing as if whoever's listening to this album may actually be dealing with this sort of phase. And I really like the bridge on this track, where she really does sort of, head on address what she's dealing with, and really sort of revealing it in a way that, doesn't pull any punches or anything like that. When she says, in these pardoned days, I am losing all my senses. In this timeless days, I can barely see through. In this crowded space, I am losing all my senses. In this drowned out phase, I can barely see through. It just sounds so poetic. I'm, going through this, and it sounds like just a really beautiful poem as I recite this here in this review. this review, and her vocals definitely, once again, really carry these lyrics home really nicely. So nicely, after this is a pretty short sort of interlude, which is called NMO, which it is pretty cool, kind of like her voice kind of warped with electronic effects, but I'm not exactly sure how this interlude really works on this album. You know, it's kind of more just kind of a filler moment for me. But then after this is yet another very incredibly catchy song, called Remains, which, once again, this is another track that has kind of the Perfume Genius, No Shape sort of effect going on, with its gothic piano, as well as its really hopeful synthesizers and drum machine, which do sound really gorgeous, and the way that they punctuate with one another and create a little attention to detail, even though they're just a few elements, sounds really nice over her voice, which this is probably one of the more kind of, this is definitely one of the more simple tracks on the record lyrically, but it's definitely enough to leave an impact, basically sort of asking herself a few questions before the album closes out. Is out, and of course, one of her best vocal performance on here is definitely on the last line, where she really does hit her high notes really nicely, which sort of shows that she not only gets inspiration from like goth and industrial sort of singing, but also definitely has a little training in like opera music a little bit too. Music too. And then this album closes out with the like painfully gorgeous, just 5-minute interlude with Half-Life, which I feel this is the song where the attention to detail that she and Alex DeGroot sort of take in the string arrangements here on this track is just so gorgeous, because they channel all kinds of different emotions. There is like melancholy and sadness, but then there's also like hope and catharsis as well. And catharsis to the strings as well. And I love the way that they're kind of intricately layered, especially in that part in the middle where over the lower strings we get these like higher strings. That create some really cool chemistry in the tones of the strings, which go really well over a kind of simple synth line and drum machine. It's a song that may not have any words to it, but it definitely at the same time creates some sort of message. Like its name, Half-Life, could mean anything, not exactly sure what it may mean, but I just don't care, because it just sounds so downright beautiful. Beautiful. And she does some really cool things here with her voice on this track. Here on this track, we get her voice is kind of like way in the background, but at the same time still delivers an impact, and I love just how like haunting and emotional her sort of like soprano howl here on this track sounds over the string arrangements. It's definitely a very satisfying way to close off this album. So yeah, overall I don't really have a whole lot of complaints here of this record. There are definitely some good reasons why I consider this my gothic pop album of the year, which it also does incorporate elements of dark wave and industrial, like dark ambient, I think is one thing that you could call it as well. call it as well. I love how like cathartic this record is, and like I said, this is definitely a very dark and like depressing record lyrically, but at the same time, definitely besides this kind of unsettling tone, it also delivers a nice kind of like a calm tone as well, And for anyone out here who's sort of dealing with depression and feels like that there's like nothing more to life for them anymore, I highly recommend you give this album a listen, and because I think it's definitely gonna inspire you to just kind of, develop a greater sense of strength, pretty much. So it's definitely gonna be a pretty inspirational record to a lot of people, and also kudos to Alex DeGroot for the amazing atmospheric production here. So I'm definitely going to give this album an 8 out of 10 for sure, because it's just gothically awesome. And that's my review for the new Zola Jesus album, Okovi, and I'll see you for episode 190.